What's going on, everybody? I'm back. Got our first ever Dana White's Contender Series episode of the Club and Sub podcast. These are probably just going to be me. I'm going to generally just do these Monday afternoons, probably, so maybe Monday morning sometimes. I had a wedding this weekend, so I'm still fucking exhausted. Just wasn't feeling like doing a show this morning, but I'm ready to do it now. Obviously, Contender Series, got 10 weeks of this, 5 fights a card, hopefully, if everything stays together. And hopefully some decent betting opportunities. We'll see. But guys, if you like the show and you like the channel, drop a like and subscribe. It helps myself and Lags out. Again, I say this every week, but we're brought to you guys by FightNumbers.com. Amazing product they got over there. It's John Kelly's website. He's got his own DFS projections up there, which is as good as anyone's in the business. They got great bets from Pepe, Ozzy, and Evan. All great guys and all super sharp bettors. And they have the live odds screen, which is tremendous. So if you want a 30% discount on your first month there, use the promo code CLUB. Additionally, as I mentioned last week, if you guys have any credit PPH outs, I would be happy to take a referral to any of them. I'll pay $250 for each referral and a $1,000 bonus for 5. Again, those are credit or PPH outs, mostly local books. You might know them as. But yeah, with that said, let's get into it. Contender Series, week number 1, 2024, 5 fights, headlined by Mansour Abdul-Malik taking on Wesley Schultz. Kind of hilarious that is the headliner because we're going to start with the first fight of the night, which is Antoine Ho taking on Loner Kavanaugh. And that is by far, in my opinion, the best fight on this card on paper. It is the highest level fight on this card by a fair amount. And both these guys are young, and they're both going to be in the UFC sooner than later, in my opinion. Current prices has Kavanaugh minus 160, comeback on Antoine Ho plus 140. What's going on, Dixon? What's on, Bufo? I don't have a bet here, not right now anyway. After taping this, I made the price about 62% on the Kavanaugh side of things for this fight. It's an interesting fight. I came into the tape wanting to bet Antoine Ho. Obviously, he's an underdog. I'm partial to dogs in general. Ho is a pretty well-rounded fighter, trains out of the MMA lab, great gym. He's only 23 years old. Pretty fast fighter, good athlete, good left hand, can switch stances, okay. Decent grappler, pretty strong submission grappler. His wrestling leaves a bit to be desired, in my opinion, though, both offensively and defensively. But he's a very, very well-rounded fighter who has mostly run through his competition to date. He's taken on Loner Kavanaugh, who's coming off Cage Warriors. Kavanaugh is a pretty exciting prospect, in my opinion. He's only 25 years old. He trains at a Great Britain top team. Also a flyweight, obviously. Kavanaugh is, at his core, he's a striker. Super, super refined striker. Very fast hands. Very good kicks to all parts, including especially the calves. Can fight going first. Can fight going second on the counter. I really feel like he should... I shouldn't say he should dominate this fight, but I think he has a clear edge in just maturation at where they both are at this point in their careers. Like, I'm very high on both of these guys, but, when I watch them striking, I just feel like Kavanaugh's got a lot more tools in the toolkit than Ho does. I think he can punish, some of Ho's reckless tendencies. Ho likes to fight with his hands down a lot, kind of almost karate-ish type stance, so I think he's going to be pretty available to be calf kicked. And so, yeah, Dixon's saying Ho looked bigger. So Ho is a bit bigger. Kavanaugh's only 5'4", so he's fairly, even for flyweight, by flyweight standards, he's fairly small. But yeah, I think it should be a good scrap. I guess when I'm thinking about it, though, I feel like Kavanaugh's sharpness and just general being a little bit tighter with the striking should provide a lot of opportunities to land hard on Ho over the course of 15 minutes. If it would go that long, I'd lean on Kavanaugh to be more likely to find a finish on the feet or land a couple of big critical shots that could potentially swing rounds. The grappling is kind of interesting because my tape pre-tape was I thought Ho may be able to out-grapple him. Post-tape, he might be able to out-grapple him, but I actually think if anybody's going to be getting multiple takedowns in this fight, it's probably Kavanaugh. I think Kavanaugh's pretty hard to take down. Does a good job of keeping the tight whizzer and getting right back up if you get in on his hips. Whereas Ho, his last fight sketched me out a bit against Miguel Sansone because Sansone's a guy that I've always struck me as a noodle. And Ho obviously won the fight, but Sansone was able to more or less take him down at will. And Ho was able to counter grapple to dominant positions and win that fight. And I think that could happen here potentially. But I do think if Kavanaugh decides he wants to kind of take this to the mat, he might be able to do that. But in the aggregate, I think it's a very, very close fight. The minutes should be close on the feet. I think either guy can have success if it hits the mat. I lean to the Kavanaugh side just because I think he's faster and I think he's much more likely to have moments. Dixon's saying, will Hose be in attendance? I'm sure there will be one or two. But yeah, so I lean Kavanaugh. I think the total's fine at like minus 210 or whatever it's at. I don't think it's super likely either one of them finishes the fight. So yeah, moving on. Jose Delgado taking on Ernie Harez. This is a fun fight. Current price, Delgado is a pretty big favorite. He's minus 330. Harez is plus 270. It's funny because I actually think in terms of like, their future upside, I think Delgado, he's pretty, you can see Delgado has a pretty high ceiling. He's got very, very good hardware, strings combinations together very well. He obviously hits pretty hard for the weight class. Just really strong physicality in general. And he's very, very young. I think he's only 23 years or 24 years old. And so I'm pretty bullish on him in his future. I have a couple issues on the Delgado side. Namely, he is pretty okay with getting in brawls and eating shots flush on the chin to give a couple back. And I have some big concerns about his grappling if and when he gets taken down. I don't think he's like has bad takedown defense, but once he's grounded, he just seems to not really have a clue as to what's going on down there, which is kind of concerning and taking on a guy in Ernie Harez. Harez, pace demon, he is the current featherweight champion for Uriah Faber's A1 Combat. Very, very high output guy, puts a lot of volume out there with his hands, attempts a lot of takedowns. Stockton guy, Gracie Stockton guy, similar to the Diaz's, he's going to attempt a fair amount of takedowns. If he gets you down, he's got decent jiu-jitsu. I don't think it's elite or anything like that, but it's solid. He's got decent back takes. He can threaten chokes from there. And but I think where he really excels the most is kind of in the clinch. He does a lot of nice dirty boxing. And he just does a good job not letting his opponents rest at all. In the context of this fight, it's interesting because on the one hand, I think Harez is in a lot of danger getting hurt here. He doesn't have very good defense. He kind of just prefers to show up like high guard to defend head strikes, which is never great, especially against the guy Delgado who picks his shots pretty well for his age. And I just don't think Harez is putting nearly as much snap on his shots as Delgado is. So it's like while they're exchanging, I think Delgado is the better striker and far more likely to hurt Harez. Like I'd actually expect him to hurt Harez a couple times if they exchange over the course of this fight and potentially finish him. With that said, though, I do think the lines is kind of wide because I mentioned Delgado's got a lot of issues off his back, and Harez is a guy who is just never going to stop pushing the pace on you. And I kind of think if he can get Delgado to the back foot, that could be a big issue for him because I haven't seen a lot of Delgado countering hard. And if he's got Delgado having to defend in the clinch for a lot of this fight, I could see him getting takedowns from there. I could see him dominating on top, or I could just see in general him just outworking Delgado in the clinch and just getting his dirty boxing and knees going. I favor Delgado outright here. I think you have to, just given the difference in hardware between the two. I feel like Delgado minus 185 to minus 200 makes some sense. But I do think the line is getting up there. Harez, he's not a bitch, man. He's got a lot of experience, and he's not afraid to brawl. He's got 8 pro fights. He's been in some wars. You can tell the guy is just not really afraid, which is, I think, what you need against a guy who throws the kind of heat Delgado throws. But, yeah, I mean, this is a good fight. I think if I were to make a prediction, I would lean to Delgado by knockout. But I think at plus 270, and particularly, I'm considering betting him at plus 270. If it gets wider, if he hits plus 300, I'll definitely bet him. I'm just trying to take, less large dog dart throws on contenders than I have in the past. But I think it's an interesting fight, and I think Harez has some tools on paper to actually make this fairly competitive. Moving on, we got Bruno Lopes. He's making his second appearance on the Contender Series. Got knocked out last year by Bredesen Rivero. He's taking on Mikhail Saziani. Current price here, Lopes minus 170. The comeback on Saziani is plus 145. I'm honestly a bit surprised at how much steam the Saziani side's taking. I haven't bet Lopes, but I may do it if the money keeps coming in here. I think Saziani is quite poor, to be honest. He hits somewhat hard, but he strikes me as more of a barroom brawler than anything else. He's just mostly winging very, very wide hooks. Now he throws somewhat fast. He's got decent leg kicks, but he's very, very easy to hit. He's very low volume. I don't think he's got the best gas in the world. I feel like, even though he's shown glimpses of volume wrestling regionally, I don't think his wrestling is really all that good, nor is his top game. And yeah, I mean, to me, this guy just seems like, I don't want to say a jobber, but I just feel like he's a guy who really just wants to get you into a brawl with him, and that's it. I don't think there's too much that's very clever about his game, I should say. On the Lopes side, Lopes is a pretty decent prospect, in my opinion. Obviously, he's a fairly experienced fighter. He's fought for a regional guy. He's fought a fairly decent level of competition. He's 12-1. The only loss being the aforementioned Ribeiro knockout. Lopes, he's pretty well-rounded. Pretty slick boxer, keeps a pretty high pace, hits hard, good jab, can counter as well. Pretty good grappler when he gets on top, very heavy on top, decent submission game. I have two big concerns with Lopes. The first is Lopes does like to scrap. He's not really afraid to bite down, get in the pocket, and swing with you, which, I mean, obviously at 205 pounds, that can be a concern because a lot of guys at 205 can knock you out. The other concern, and it's more of a minor one, I haven't seen this guy off his back ever. He seems to have decent takedown defense, and on top, he's fairly fundamentally sound. So I'd assume he can get off his back if he's grounded. But it is one of those things where, we have this Brazilian guy, and how many of these guys have we seen, get taken down and then just decide they're going to play jiu-jitsu off their back? That would be that's probably my biggest concern about the fight, to be honest. Because I don't think Saani is a great wrestler, and I don't think he's likely to get a bunch of takedowns here. But if he got one or two, it wouldn't shock me. And so it's like, I don't want him to get a takedown and then be sitting there ready to put a bullet in my brain because I bet Lopes that he's just trying to throw up a triangle as a light heavyweight. But ultimately, I don't think that's going to happen. And I do think Lopes is the much better fighter. I also think his gas tank is a bit hairy. Honestly, he's slowed down basically every time he's left round one. But I think Saani is as well. And honestly, like Lopes, he may have a bad gas tank, but I mean, he's finished so many fights early. The guy's got real horsepower. I just think he's a much, much better fighter than Saani. I won't be shocked if he gets clipped in this fight, or if it goes into round two and it slows down and this fight just turns into like a really gross heavyweight type fight. But I mean, on paper here, I think Lopes has to be at least minus 200. He's better at everything, in my opinion, by like a fairly large margin. He's fought better competition. He's shown like actual diversity to his game, both in stand-up and in the grappling, and I haven't seen anything of that from Saani. Saani can clip him. Maybe he can get on top and control him if Lopes plays guard, but I do think, Lopes should win this fight, and I do think there's potentially a little bit of value on it. I don't know if I'd play him above minus 150 just because, at minus 150, I'd be very, very confident in the value there, but I do think he's the side here. In terms of a total, like the under is minus 145 right now. I don't really want to lay juice on under 1.5, but I do think like the under is the side. Like I think someone's going to die here. Moving on, we got Meng Ding taking out Rami Hamed. Ding minus 210. The comeback on Hamed plus 180. I bet Ding at like minus 186. I think there's still maybe a little bit of meat on the bone, but I wouldn't recommend a bet. I capped him at about minus 233 or 70%. It's a fun fight. Rami Hamed, he's a fun fighter. He's like a homeless man, Stephen Thompson, honestly. Just fights in that karate stance, hands down. Very, very, very strong leg kicker. But past the leg kicks, there's just not a lot in his game I like. He's not a great boxer. He tends to throw single shots. Like he doesn't really throw in combination ever. He's a truly tragic wrestler. Like very, very easy to take down. His main method to get up is just giving his back right away, which can work against some guys, but not anybody with any kind of sense of jiu-jitsu. And the worst part of Hamed's game is just like the guy, he's been fighting. I mean, in his last, he's just been fighting absolute bums for a couple of years now. He fought some decent fighters earlier in his career, but they mostly all beat him. And his last three fights, like Frank Carrillo's corpse, somehow that went to decision. Elias Santos, who's a below average regional fighter, and was 2-3 at the time. Now he won that fight solidly, but Santos took him down 6 or 7 fights at times in that fight, which was hugely concerning to me. Because Hamed had a giant size edge, and Santos couldn't set anything up and was still getting easy takedowns. He fought a guy named Jimmy Zuleta, who was 46 years old in 2022, beat him with leg kicks, and then fought another guy who was 3-4 named Julio Diaz, who was also awful, who he finished with leg kicks a minute into the fight. He hasn't been fighting good guys, and like the history of this guy's career is he looks good against cans, and then every time he steps up, he gets beaten up pretty bad. he's taken on Deng Ming, who another guy where it's like, I bet him, but you got to be careful with these Chinese prospects, man. I mean, he's got 42 fights, which is good. I mean, he's got a lot of experience, but the Chinese regional scenes, if we're being honest, they're just not good at all. What I will say is I think Ding's a guy who's improving, though. I do like his game in the aggregate. He's pretty big for the weight class, 6'2", 75 inches. He's only 29 years old. Pretty good boxer, nice jab, can string combos together well. Seems to be able to take a shot really well, and he throws with a lot of power himself. Cardio seems to check out very well. I actually think he is a pretty decent wrestler. It's funny because a couple years ago, his wrestling would have been considered the weak point in his game, but I actually think some of his offensive wrestling is actually like pretty neat, and some of the stuff that he does. I don't think that's going to be a path that he relies on much at the UFC level or at this level to win, and I'd be a little surprised if he goes to it here. But I do think it's a path that, like, if he wants to take just like the most optimal path to victory in this fight, like, he should wrestle Hamed, because I don't think there's any reason to think Hamed's going to be able to keep this fight upright. In the stand-up, it's interesting, right? I mean, because like Hamed, I don't really rate a lot of Hamed's game, but he is a pretty vicious leg kicker, and he does, he's not a guy who's going to bang down in the pocket with you, which I guess could be one. That's like my biggest concern, I think, for Ming here. Like, maybe he could compromise in the kicks. I'm a little less concerned about that than Hamed's just a very, very mobile fighter who tries to avoid exchanges. And, maybe he can do that and just outpoint Ming here. Like, that could happen. But I do think when they do get into exchanges, I think Ming's got much better hands. He's a much better combo striker. I think he can take a shot much better than Hamed can. And I think he throws with just a lot more intent than Hamed does. Plus, Hamed's just there to be cracked. So, like, I think Ding's got a couple paths to victories here. I think he's the much more likely fighter to win by KO in this fight. I think even if it should go the distance, I had mentioned my concern about Hamed possibly dancing around the outside and, just not pointing him. But Hamed's not particularly high output, and I could see Ding, even in that kind of fight, just winning via landing the harder shots and the more damaging shots. And then I think he's got a wrestling path. So, yeah, I mean, Rami Hamed, he's on short notice here. He's 32 years old. He doesn't fight that often, and when he has, he's not really fighting great competition. Taking on Meng Ding, who's 29, I think he seems like a decent prospect to me. Again, I say that with the caution that, it's hard to trust a lot of these Chinese guys so you actually see how they perform at the UFC level. I just don't put a lot of stock into the JCK regional scene, like, at all. But he does, I mean, the tape anyway looks like it checks out for the Ding side of stuff. So I like him here. I think he should be about minus 233. I think he's going to win this fight and likely win it by knockout. Main event, we got Mansour Abdul-Malik taking on Wesley Schultz. Current price, Abdul-Malik minus 295, comeback on Schultz plus 235. Weird fucking fight because there's really like not a lot of available footage or data on Malik. He's training out of MMA Masters. He's a fairly, I believe, let me see how old he is. I think he's pretty young, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he's 26 years old. Big frame for 205. He's 6'2" with an 80-inch reach. That's good. But there's only about 6 minutes of footage on the guy. And the first fight of his career where he fought a guy who was 0-2 and retired after. And in that fight, it was just kind of a lot of dancing around each other. Malik got hurt really, really bad at one point in that fight, which kind of concerns me. And then eventually John Colson, the guy who was fighting, just ran out of gas 3 minutes in, and I don't know why I keep calling him Ming. Mansour finished him. But couldn't take much. The only thing I took out of that fight really was that Mansour looked very, very, very green, which would be expected in your debut professional fight. And that he had potential durability concerns. Like, I was a bit alarmed that the guy he was fighting hurt him badly in that fight. Then you skip 3 fights, all of which he finishes in round 1, but couldn't find tape on any of them. And he had his last fight against Alan Saint-Calais, and Saint-Calais, a jobber who's 1-1, hasn't fought since that fight. He's 35 years old. He just came out, took him down, beat him up, and finished him with ground and pound about a minute and a half into the fight. So, again, not really a lot of data to take out of that fight, which it makes it hard to evaluate what Mansour is. My suspicion on Mansour is that he's an athlete more than anything else, and you can see he's a good athlete. He's got a good build. He has very explosive movements. He comes from a D1 wrestling background, but with that said, this is not some explosive D1 wrestler. He went 1-8 in 2 years at Maryland, which isn't a great D1 program to begin with. So I don't know how much stock to put in that, and I actually haven't really liked the couple wrestling attempts, the couple takedown attempts I've seen from him inside the cage. So I'm not super sold. That'll be a coherent path to victory at the higher levels. His striking, not a lot of data. He looks like he hits hard. He's fast, but the limited data there is, he has almost no defense. I have the aforementioned concerns about durability. So it's kind of hard to evaluate what Mansour is. We know he's a good athlete. That's what we got. And he trains in a good gym, and he's 26 years old. So good intangibles, big guy. He's fighting Wesley Schultz, who, Wesley Schultz is like the opposite of a good athlete. Actually also comes from a wrestling background himself. I actually think I would consider Schultz's wrestling background to be better than Mansour's. He wrestled at D3, but he actually had a very, very successful D3 career. He actually beat Jordan Newman in a wrestling match, which, you guys might know Jordan Newman from Bellator, but Jordan Newman is like a Division III legend. Guy's a serious wrestler, and Schultz beat him, and pinned him, no less, which is like super impressive. Which is one of the reasons I bet Wesley Schultz against Dylan Bucka in LFA, because Dylan Bucka is basically just a wrestler. And that fight left me with a ton of concerns, and concerns I still have here, which is that Bucka was he did win a round against Bucka, but Bucka was mostly able to just rely on strength and physicality and just bully him around with that. And that's a concern I'm always going to have for Schultz. This is a guy whose striking is very bad. He doesn't have great hands. Every kick he throws tends to be very, very naked. I think he's going to get knocked out sooner than later, to be honest. His best attributes are his grappling. He's an okay wrestler. He's got plus jiu-jitsu, I would say, for the weight class at any rate. And, that's really where he's going to have most of his success. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, let's see. Yeah, he's got 5 fights or 3 wins by submission of his 6 career wins. So, that's really his jiu-jitsu is what's going to win in fights. My concern just for Schultz is I just don't think he's physical enough for this level. I think stronger guys are going to be able to kind of just tip him over. And, it's nice to have good jiu-jitsu, but it's very, very hard to play jiu-jitsu from guard at 205 pounds and sub guys. It's just guys just don't have the same kind of dexterity. So I have concerns that he will not be able to. Interesting. I haven't looked at the weigh-ins yet, Dixon. Dixon said Malik looks smaller. That's interesting. So I just have concerns about, Schultz's physicality. I don't think he's going to be able to win many fights at this level on the feet, and I think he will struggle to grapple UFC caliber athletes. In the context of this fight, it's just really hard to know what to make of it. Schultz, we have a much more clear idea of what he is. He's 6-1. He took a round off Bucka, even though that fight was kind of a bad look. He at least competed for parts of that fight, and Bucka's in the UFC. I don't rate Bucka much, but I would certainly make Bucka a decent-sized favorite over Mansour. Other than that, he's mostly fought pretty poor competition, but he's handled them as he should. And the competition he's fought has been far better than the competition that Malik has fought. And when I think about this fight, I kind of feel like I think it's either going to be a firefight early where Schultz probably is the one to die, although, again, Malik's durability is kind of an unknown, so maybe he could die. But if it's not that, I think it just turns into a scrambly mess of a fight, to be honest. And I don't know if I favor Schultz in that kind of fight, but, it's certainly a kind of fight he can win. And I will say that, Malik, we have no data on him passed around, but the way this guy moves around, being as built as he is and as explosive as he is, I'd be pretty surprised if he has good cardio. The biggest problem that I have is I just don't think Schultz has good cardio. I shouldn't even say I don't think. I know he doesn't have good cardio. I've seen him gas out multiple times. So it's the area that I think Schultz could really capitalize on, I don't really think he has an edge in this fight. Now, it is possible that Malik is just a fish out of water when it comes to grappling, submission grappling. I think Schultz could win that kind of fight, as well as the fact that we just don't have much data on Malik. So I think the long tail downside on Malik here could be subterranean, what his floor could be. His ceiling could be quite high in this fight because he is a much better athlete, but his floor is quite low, which is why I think the line is probably a little wide. It's if he doesn't kill Schultz in the first 3 minutes, how good are you feeling about that bet? Probably not great. I haven't decided if I'll play Schultz just because I try to picture it in my head how I think it's going to go. And there's about 1 million red flags on the Malik side that make me want to fade him here. But I just keep envisioning them tying up and Malik just taking him down, being stronger and bullying him because of it. As I mentioned, I'd be a little surprised if Schultz guards something. It's possible Malik's got nothing there. And maybe when they're fresh, Schultz can reverse position. He did do that with Bunka and took his back. So like maybe Schultz can get his back early in the fight and sub him. It's just very hard to see because I just think he's so outgunned physically and athletically here that I think it's a really tall ask for him. But all of that said, Schultz has 7 fights. He's been to decision multiple times. Malik's never been out of the first round and looked like he was slowing down in his first ever fight. I do think the line is almost certainly too wide in this fight. Something I'm kind of interested in, I haven't decided if I'll play it or not. I kind of think the over is like an interesting look. Everybody I know is betting under. Over's at like plus 180 right now. But we don't really know what Malik's power is going to look like against real fighters. And every Wes Schultz fight seems to turn into a scrambly mess. And it's not very hard for me to envision this turning into a clinch battle really quickly and then just scrambling around on the mat. And in that kind of fight, I just don't see how over 1.5 can be plus 180. Like, it's not like we have Tom Nolan against Alex Reyes this weekend, you know? It's not like Schultz is in his prime. Malik's a developing fighter. Schultz likes to grapple. Malik comes from a wrestling background. I'd be shocked if Malik finished Schultz on the mat. Less shocked if Schultz finished him. But my point is, I think there is a really high percentage chance that this fight does turn into a very grapple-heavy fight. And if that's the case, plus 180 on the over can't be right. I don't know if I'll play it, but I do think there is some equity for it. I'll post about it if I do. I'm just going to watch it because if it gets like plus 230, I mean, I'm definitely going to hammer it then if that happens. Dixon asked, do I think this chick Dana is giving out contracts for decisions? Yes. That's like my point. It's funny. I was just talking with my boy Sean Orr about this a little while ago. And a couple of my friends have mentioned DWCS, you know, these guys don't fight to their win condition. But like when I look at like the last 2 years, particularly 3 years really, since COVID, the DWCS now, you basically get contracts for winning as long as you don't look like total shit. They're giving out contracts like 80% of winners these days. Like, do you think the coaches don't know this? Do you think the managers don't know this? Do you think the fighters don't know this? Like, I think there was actually some justification for being worried about guys not fighting to their optimal win path a couple of years ago when it was literally maybe 1 to 2 contracts were given out per show. But when it's 4 to 5 per show, I mean, if I were coaching one of these guys, like, you know, a Wes Schultz or somebody, I'd be like, you grapple your fucking ass off. You know, you're going to get a contract. What people don't seem to get, yeah, Dixon just nailed it in the chat right here. Would the UFC rather pay a little to DWCS newbie even if they don't get finishes? Yeah, this is how the UFC is now seeding the program for the most part now. It's through Contender Series. We get it every year now. They're adding somewhere between 25 and 40 fighters once a summer that are very cheap on rookie contracts, and they're starting to attract better talent to the show. You know, we've gotten a couple champions out of it now. I don't think they're as concerned about, you know, the finishing aspect of it anymore. I think the numbers that clearly dictate that. Now, maybe fighters will continue to be idiots and listen to like Michael Bisping and go out there and brawl, but we've seen more wrestlers wrestle more often on the show the last couple of years, and they haven't really been punished too much for it. So I'm not as concerned about that. But yeah, I think there's value on Schultz. I might bet him. I might not. I'm trying to be a bit more judicious about picking dogs on contenders. It just has not worked out for me well the last 2 years. I'm not saying I won't do it. I would like to bet Schultz at like plus, I don't know, 270 range would be good, I think. But I do think he's the only bettable side here. So yeah, to recap, at the lines, I lean Schultz, picking Malik to win by KO. I bet Ding, and I lean him even at the line where he is now. I lean Lopes, picking him to win by KO as well. I lean Delgado to win, but I think there might be some value on the Harez side of things. And I lean Kavanaugh, picking him to win by decision. So, guys, thanks for coming out here today. Really appreciate it. Going to do this every week. Also, we'll be doing a show Friday morning this week to talk PFL. Pretty good PFL card this week. I got to finish grinding when I threw it. Thanks for joining me. If you like the show, drop a like, subscribe. I'd appreciate it. And, yeah, we'll see you Wednesday night for the normal show. Peace.